Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Vanessa Chang. I'm a curator, writer, and educator. Today, I'm speaking to you from Yelamu, also known as San Francisco, on the unceded territories of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. This panel discussion, Art and Biology, is brought to you by Immersive Arts Alliance. Based in the San Francisco Bay Area, Immersive Arts Alliance supports collaboration between international and local artists working with new media technologies, creating experiences that break down the barrier between art and audience. A newly formed nonprofit, we partner with Bay Area arts organizations to bring large-scale visionary projects to life. Immersive Arts Alliance also engages the public in vital forums and discussions about the impact of art and technology on creativity and culture at large. This panel is co-presented with Leonardo, the International Society for the Arts, Science, and Technology. Today, I'm doing double duty. I sit on Immersive Arts Alliance's board, and I'm Senior Program Manager at Leonardo. So delighted to represent both of these amazing organizations. Today's event, Art and Biology, explores an emerging field at the boundary of art and science, which uses tools and technologies of science to create artworks that explore the relationship between humans and nature. Bioart has been defined as an art practice where humans work with live tissues, bacteria, living organisms, and life processes. Jennifer Parker, one of our panelists, had described her course, Bioart and Design, as a growing field of artistic practice at the boundary of art and life, a space to provoke questions and create artworks that explore the relationship between humans and the planet. According to Isotope Journal, bioart is often ludicrous. It can be lumpy, gross, unsanitary, sometimes invisible. But at the same time, it does something very traditional that art is supposed to do. It draws attention to the beautiful and grotesque details of nature that we might otherwise never see. With these varied and expansive definitions of bioart, I'll invite our panelists today to share a bit about their work to offer us a few different lenses of how we might think about bioart. So we'll begin by introducing each of our discussants, upon which they will share a little bit about their work. After this, we'll expand into a broader discussion. For those of you watching, if you have a question, please feel free to pop your question into the Q&A box. If the timing is right, we'll bring it up during the conversation. If not, we'll get to it at the end of the hour. Our chat is open as well, so you're welcome to send us a message directly. So let's begin. First, I'd like to introduce Emilia Tikka, a transdisciplinary designer and researcher. Her work explores philosophical dimensions and cultural implications of the genome editing technology CRISPR, engaging with questions of human biomedical enhancement. In this frame, her current research and writing focuses on renegotiations of human-nature-technology relations in technoscientific discourse. She's a PhD candidate at Aalto University, School of Arts, Design and Architecture in Helsinki, Finland, and an artist in residence at the Finnish BioArt Society and Art for Med project. And she has shown her work at several international venues. Emilia, would you like to tell us a bit about your work right now?
Yes, thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I'm very, very glad to be with you here today. And yes, let me share my screen to show you a little bit about my work. So I will very shortly present you 3 of my works, just to get an idea of how I approach this topic of today. So the first one is called Eudaimonia, Biotechnologization of the Soul. So this work deals with questions of human condition in the era of CRISPR and genetic engineering. It is a speculative story on a question: what if we could edit genes to enhance our psyche? And it draws from the latest research on behavioral genetics. So this speculative story is a short film that you can see here, a film still from, and it also includes a speculative genome editing device. And let me just, yeah. So the second work I'm highlighting here quickly. It's called ION. So this work is about human longevity, time, and death. And for this work, I was an artist in residence at the Max Delbruck Center for Molecular Medicine in Berlin. And this work consists of 3 parts: laboratory experiments, focusing on reprogramming cellular time and aging. Secondly, it is a speculative story shown in photographs, as you can see here, one example, and also a semi-speculative device. So the story that you see here is a story of a couple with very different kind of an opposite understandings to life and death. So a man, a transhumanist who wished to prolong his life with technology. And then on the other hand, a woman with a spiritual worldview who sees aging and death more like as a part of life. And obviously more of this works on the website if you're interested to have a look at it more detail. And the third is a very new project that I just started, as Vanessa said, as artist in residence at the Arts for Medicine. So this new project is titled as Xeno Optimizations for Arctic Survival. So this project is about kind of problematizing now this transhumanist nature relation as very anthropocentric, and rather aim to imagine biotechnologies through a different, more like a post-human nature relation. And for this project, I'm very inspired by Donna Haraway's speculation on what if genetic engineering would be used to form a new symbiotic partnerships between species. So the idea of human optimization is here, or kind of asked, what would be a post-human human optimization? Could it be perhaps a survival strategy in the era of extinction and the climate change? And the question how to move from extracting nature to rather collaborating with nature. And this work is also a collaboration with the research partner Ola Valkeapää, who is indigenous Sami reindeer herder from the Finnish Sapmi area. So yeah, that was my short introduction to my work, and as I said, more in my website if you are interested. So now I give a turn to the next presenter. Let me just stop the screen sharing. Yes.
Thank you, Emilia. Wow, fascinating work. Looking forward to talking about it a bit more. Next, I'd like to introduce Danielle Ciembieda. She's an alter ego artist working at the intersection of environment, emerging technology, and community. She's an artist in residence at the UC Santa Cruz Genomics Institute through the Open Lab. She also serves as creative director of LEONARDO, the International Society for the Arts, Sciences, and Technology. And you can read more about her work at ciembieda.com and at Alter Eco Artist on various social platforms. Danielle, would you like to share a little bit about your work with us?
Great, thanks, Vanessa. I'm going to do a screen share of a project that actually really reminded me when Emilia was mentioning work around the post-human possibilities or post-human and Donna Haraway. I've done quite a few different bioart projects in the past, but this really reminded me of that because of the speculative nature of what would happen to our environment when people no longer rule the earth, but we're really looking at the Planthropocene or the Anthropocene, and how do we actually think about ourselves after all of the different genetic editing that we've done, or hybridity that we've built with GMOs that we've eaten, and how is nature going to respond? How are other extraplanetary moments going to be responding to us during the post-human era that I think that is feeling more and more closer to where we're going than we've ever felt before. I'm not going to dive in too deep into this project because I actually want to spend most of my time talking about a project where I'm working with the UC Santa Cruz Open Lab, and something where Jennifer Parker is also a part of. Let me see if I can get this back up on the site. Here we go. Let me go back over here. And this is through this project that is my current focus in bioart. It's an Instagram related project called Xeno, and you can actually see how to connect to this Instagram through the Instagram handle Genome Art. But Genome is a Morpheus personality sharing speculative stories of transhumanism and genomics through these narratives, through our augmented reality, through open GT networks, through looking at how we actually understand and translate a lot of the areas that bioart and also the areas of genetic modification, genome research, where those different avenues moving towards, and then how do we actually translate that into a way that the common person can understand. It's actually a really complex field, but I'm trying to invite things around speculative nature, humor, science fiction, to really engage and connect with this. And really, in doing that, I'm creating a lot of performative opportunities for artists and scientists to come in and work with Instagram Live and other platforms to really share some of these ideas in the most imaginative way as possible, so that we can start to really create an understanding of what some of these areas of bioart, biodesign are related to, especially when it comes to genetic research. I mean, if you were to look at the UC Santa Cruz Genomics Institute site, you'll notice that there's people who are working on incredible research to help understand how to map out childhood cancers or forensic DNA, soils, the human genome browser, which is the original go-to browser for all of the different research centers from all over the world contributing to it. And then also the COVID browser, which really helped and assist us to where we were able to get the vaccine. Some of the areas that Emilia is focusing on, like CRISPR, these are different tracks that I'll be exploring over the year through Instagram. And thinking of it as genome is not human, or right now it's in the form of a microorganism. Maybe it will change forms in a month, or as it evolves, as many microorganisms do, many cellular bodies do. But how do we actually look at that learning and explore that through this particular platform? So this is the beginning of this conversation, but I'm sharing a lot of information as I see it through this particular channel, and being able to try to influence, as you can say, social media influencers do, but with a non-human entity, which I've created in this space. And so this is where I'm sitting in right now in terms of my research in the biodesign, bioart space. But there's a lot to navigate here, and a lot of people who are working in this area that are really interesting, and I'm hoping to illuminate as we move forward with this. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Danielle. Lots of overlap there that I'm keen to explore further. And finally, I'd like to introduce our last panelist, Jennifer Parker. Jennifer Parker is an artist and professor of art and digital art and new media at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and founding director of the Open Lab Collaborative Research Center. Among numerous projects, she co-founded the Algae Society Bioart and Design Lab in 2018. And most recently, she worked with Cessnon Gallery on What Makes Us Human, an art and genomics convergence. Her work has been shown at venues across Silicon Valley and the Bay Area, such as Yerba Buena Center of the Arts and SS MoMA, as well as internationally. Jennifer, would you like to share some of your work with us?
Sure, thank you. It's great to meet everyone and see everyone again and spend this time together. I really appreciate that. And all the shout outs to Santa Cruz, which I think is telling in this moment as an institution that doesn't have a medical center, that started organic farming, that has the kind of legacy that I hope to continue since I've been there about 20 years. Open Lab was mentioned, so I thought I would just go ahead and pull up the website. And I started this about 11 years ago as a collaborative research center that was really looking at these intersections of how to sort of create opportunities for people to work together. And one of the most recent projects that was mentioned was is working with the Genomics Institute. And in this moment, I sort of was trying to imagine how we could be alone together. And I started this project called What Makes Us Human, and a lot of the research that Daniela brought up can be found here of what's going on between the ideas of research within the Genomics Institute, but then also in referencing different artists around the world and at UC Santa Cruz scholars in a different kind of framework. And for me, it was also important to sort of build an index of research that sort of gave a different perspective to how we look at the internet, and that, you know, we're all looking at these squares, and I became really interested in the orb as this idea that you couldn't see what's behind it. And so how do we create these spaces and create shows in new and different interesting ways that also shared research conflicts, interests, and differences from one campus to another. So What Makes Us Human, you can go and explore. It also has an index of each one of these projects that you can visit and look at. The Algae Society, which was also mentioned, is also represented in this index and is a growing, evolving project. We decided to do a virtual hub as well, which you can find on the About page if you're interested in checking that out. And this again was another way to sort of situate us in a kind of placemaking agenda of how we're from a specific area and then the land really informing our research. And what does it mean if you're sort of from a space or from a place, and then, but we're all connecting through the internet, and how can we kind of float above that land and recognize the land and recognize the water and the air as part of how we think through our research practices. Just real quickly, the BioArt Design Lab, the Algae Society, that actually started several years ago. In 2012, I started a project called Blue Trail, and it was looking at and thinking through how we don't really understand the role of the ocean and the planets. I mean, we understand it, but how we don't talk about it as part of our the carbon sequestering in our relationship to oxygen and our human relationship to oxygen, in that it is this real exchange, and 50% of the world's oxygen comes from phytoplankton and comes from the oceans. And so it was really about starting this conversation with graduate student at the time, and then continuing that work and evolving it into really more different varieties of algae and how we could complement and work together through collaborating across the globe in the same ways that you actually, let me go to projects, in the same ways that algae moves and traverses through land and water and air. We also thought it was really important to think about the people and how we could create these different locations around the world where we could talk specifically about algae and work together to create exhibitions and shows and education opportunities that involved workshops and food and all of the kind of wonderful things that algae provides. I'll stop sharing, but I think there's an interesting point that maybe is a good place to jump into, is this word collaboration, which is one that I've been challenged with in some ways, because while I want to assume that I'm collaborating, I can't actually get that consent. Right? We can make healthy growing environments, or, you know, we can create moments of respect. But I think it's really in the kind of ways in which we might translate our species from one to the other, or learn and listen. we have, yeah, so I would love to sort of talk about that in some ways, because I think that's something that all the relationships with bioart and design are in a kind of conversation around. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, I think that's a great point to jump in. One thing that is a really is continuous across your three projects and across your three practices is this notion of the human and the non-human and the transhuman, and how do we orient ourselves around the human? Is it that we are collaborating with non-human entities, or is there something else that we need to do to decenter that notion of the human, and what's at stake here? So, I mean, that's an open question, maybe like, how would you understand the role of the human or decentering the human in your work, and how much you want to try and revise that understanding of the relationship between human and non-human entities in your art practice?
Did you want me to answer that?
Go for it if you have something to say.
I mean, I think we have so much to do as a human species, right? And that we have sort of failed one another. And there's this amazing book, if you haven't read it yet, by Dean Spade. It's called Mutual Aid. I highly recommend it. And I've been sort of touting it with another colleague of mine from UC Santa Barbara, Kim Yashuda. And it is this idea of, we've been hearing a lot about, I feel like, self-care, as this, again, it is kind of this individualized moment. And this, what I love about mutual aid is it is about community. And I think as we try to, and we've seen this incredible uprising, in this last year and a half or so, understand our own species, how do we be better at that before we even start to figure out, these relationships with other species. So I think there's a lot of work to do within the human race, the human species. But then there's also a lot of acknowledgement of what has been done and looking at different cultures around the world and ancient civilizations. And, there's so much that we just stepped over. I would say we, as in the kind of hierarchy of Western thought. So I think it's a lot of taking this profound pause to figure out how we want to move forward into the future, and do we have the space to do that in a crisis?
Danielle or Emilia, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I'll just sort of add to that. I mean, I think quite a bit about decentralizing the human. I mean, I think that's part of the problem I think that we've had. I notice that a lot of the relationships or the work that comes out with, there's incredible bio artists all over the world, and I think several of them are on this call, and I can I encourage those like Adam Zareski and Roberta Buani and many of the other ones that are in here who are part of the BioArt network can chime in here. But a lot of looking at BioArt is also been looking at how do we deal with the environment, and how do we deal with the way that we as humans have interacted with the environment. And I think part of it is like in also in the spirit of removing ourselves from or changing the way that we've approached our colonizing mentality, is to think about how do we actually pull back from that equation and decentralize ourselves and decolonialize ourselves from nature. Because we've, as Jennifer mentioned at the beginning, is like I hear this word collaboration mentioned quite a bit, but of course that is not consensual with most of the species that we interact with, even the ones that we're spying on and listening to and using sensors and feedback to gain from. We're trying to learn from them because they are doing something that is engineered in a way that we don't quite understand, and how can we really learn from them. And I think there's value in that. But also is like there's this fine line about where do we go from there, and making sure that we are rethinking the way that we approach this in a way that is moving us away from us taking over or us applying our ways of life to other species. I think that's where we need to take a step back.
Yeah, Emilia, you talk a bit about your work about post-human optimization, and this notion of symbiotic partnerships. How might this perspective lend to the discussion so far?
Yeah, like especially in my the research right now, where I collaborate with someone who has this sort of like non-Occidental understanding of nature, I think, and who lives in a kind of a, in his own words, symbiotic relationship with his reindeers. It's through this collaboration, you can really set your nature relation from this modernist to something else, and try to imagine the biotechnologies or technologies in general through a different nature relation. I think this sort of like a symbiotic setting is a good way of, or sort of good entry to think nature differently in general. So I think for me, it's really about like also listening to sort of different understanding of nature that is already present in our Western society, and through that open the sort of scientific discussions for different kind of voices.
How do you think terms, and I mean, this is an open question for everyone, how do you think terms like the post-human or the transhuman might help to support this practice of, if not collaboration, I mean, what would be the better word here that you would offer, and is it something that perhaps might serve as a larger model for, I mean, it seems like there's a little bit of traffic happening here between like how we conceive of human to human relationships in mutual aid networks and how we conceive of human to non-human relationships, as well as this kind of orientation of the decolonial, right? And what you say is the non-Occidental perspective. So how can we move forward in navigating those different kind of maps of understanding, and how might something like the post-human help us to do that?
I think it's challenging because, you know, human is already a problematic term, right? And people who had rights and human rights hasn't always been equally identified, and we're now getting to a place where we're you know, women didn't have rights, and you know, certain slaves and immigrants were sort of seen and titled differently, especially from North America. And then we're seeing animal rights, and then we're now thinking through water rights and rights for non-human species. So I think there is it's a good place to start for these conversations, and I would love to see new language and words evolve to be understood, and probably even de-evolve, you know, and to paths that we can sort of embrace and hold up and rise through, where we've sort of maybe got the wrong footing, perhaps with progress. So, you know, rolling back the tide a bit and sort of valuing other ways of doing and listening and learning. That takes a kind of sentient being that is uncomfortable and less predictable, perhaps.
I like this word you said, Jennifer, the de-evolve, right? I think this is something that is something to look into and be curious about. And I've been racking my brain around how do we actually understand a way for the communities that our species is connecting with, our conversations that we have both online and offline, and then the conversations or ways of communicating that other species are having together. How do we find those common grounds and those commonalities, so we can actually look at doing something together, understanding each other more? And it is something that actually I'm beginning to work on with a new research initiative that Leonardo is putting forward. Is actually, how do you actually understand human and non-human conversations and connecting those threads? Because I think that's part of it, is that we're not able to ask directly, right? And we're inferring, and we're using our own language and our own dialect to make that interpretation. So there's a rethinking it or applying a new method of understanding that is pretty essential. And I think also connecting back to people before us, especially Western colonized cultures, of how, you know, how indigenous technologies, indigenous histories have really communicated and connected with the natural world for centuries. I think that's also part of understanding that ability, and that's part of that is like removing our own language and bias from that.
What do you think, and I mean, this is another open question to everyone, then the role of art practice is in doing that work? Danielle, both you and Emilia use the language of speculation in your art practice. Is that bound up with this larger project of envisioning a future that maybe isn't so tethered to this desire for progress, which is in many ways also a kind of practice of colonization and domination? So how can art practice as speculation, or, you know, as another kind of articulation of the future, help with doing this work?
Yeah, if I may start with that. For me, the speculation is really about sort of making the fixed idea of reality malleable, that we don't take this reality necessary for granted. Other futures, other presents are possible, but of course, speculation is also about contesting hegemonies, like we talked about the nature relation. But in my practice with speculative design, it all comes down to storytelling and telling stories about different alternative realities that might be existing or in the future or in the past. But this, my current collaboration has really helped me to sort of also think beyond. Just to take an example of time, like our time, the Western time is linear. It's about progress. We always going somewhere. And and my collaboration partner just told me recently, like in sort of in his reindeer life that he calls his life, he is not going anywhere. It is not about going forward. So the whole like understanding of time is very different. So, you know, and this is kind of existing reality. So you don't necessarily even have to speculate. You can just listen sometimes. And I guess art and design, it's about also building these bridges and sort of visualizing these things.
Yeah, and I think to sort of go off of what you're saying, Emilia, is thinking about it through scales as well. I think of scales in time. I'm part of an astrobiology initiative at UC Santa Cruz as well. And, you know, when you start to imagine and think about the planet in relation to other planets and stars and materials and gases in the universe, and how that scale is one that we've always sort of looked up at and are now sort of looking back down in different perspectives. And it's even into the sort of nanoscale now of looking into the single cell. And so I feel like there's also this in speculation when we're seeing, you know, people wanting to, you know, cultivate, extract Mars for good, you know, in terms of, you know, the billionaires that are rushing up to space, and what are we doing, you know, and is this an amazing exploration we've couched ourselves in? And I think art is a place to ask about the ethics of that and the values of that and the questions, but also to speculate what does it mean that's amazing, and what does it mean that's maybe not such a good idea, and what's it going to look like if we're growing things in atmospheres we don't really understand, and we've already done such a great job on this planet. So I think there's this moment of the word speculation is used a lot, and I think, you know, we're also thinking about this word confluence a lot with the Algae Society. And maybe that goes into sort of the symbiotic relationships as well, that you start to sort of see your role maybe as service to others, and instead of extractor or explorer, but maybe like the reindeer herder, that you sort of stay within your space of that knowing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that I agree with everything that has been said so far, and I think there's this really critical part where artists coming in to work with all the different scientists and agencies and entities that are doing this exploration is really critical, because offering that ability to see things from a social, ethical, cultural standpoint, and really be able to process that both intuitively, but also through other means, is how we put almost like, I don't know, rubber barriers or something. How we create a filter of wait, let's think about this again. Here's how restructuring the way that this thought is going, because if we don't involve ourselves with this, and I really encourage artists to get involved in this field, we don't involve ourselves with this, and we remove ourselves from this, and we remove our the work, then somebody is going to continue on with that same methodology of what has been defined as progress, as GDP, as economic growth, as exploration, as dominance. And we have seen for our entire history of the human species that has been dangerous, and that has done harm. So this is where we were able to come in with that speculative ability, and just say, wait a minute, okay, let's pull back here and really put ourselves at that table. So
I'm interested too, what I'm hearing is a lot about the failures of the narratives of progress and dominance that have really defined modernity and indeed science. So in trying to decenter the human and do this kind of speculative practice, I wonder if any of you have thought more about what that would mean for a corollary like ethics or politics, right? Like how would we have to totally like shift the way we think about our ethical commitments or our political commitments or our social commitments in the light of this kind of work?
Well, I think you bring up a good point, and I think we need to acknowledge all of the amazing wonders of modern world as well. I mean, I think that's a really important part, that, you know, we have done things that are of value, and I think it is sitting on the not so fun, you know, committees to make sure that there's a voice there, and that you're part of looking for the questions that need to be answered, and not just looking to solve problems, but being there from the beginning to help ask questions about how to do things moving forward, and how to really empower things through mutual respect for others, but also through, you know, giving voice to those that haven't had them, and see, like, well, how would you do it? Let's see what you would do, and sort of passing the power wand around, so that there's many more ways of experiencing whatever culture. And I think, you know, Danielle brings up a good point where, you know, it is art at that table that changes the conversation. And whether you're sitting at the Genomics Institute, or you're in HisCon, or you're at the Feminist Studies, there's a way, I think, that we kind of are able to ask questions that maybe don't have answers, or not, you know, ever been thought about, or we don't have the need from sciences to have specific outcomes. We get to be speculative in the what if moment. So I feel like that's an opportunity perhaps to acknowledge, like, what if we did this instead? Like, let's actually have that conversation. But you have to be at the table, and you have to go to the meetings, and you have to be often I'm the only one in these groups, you know, and embedding myself in different disciplines to bring that forward it's a kind of social practice that isn't very sexy.
Yeah, I also agree with the speculation can be about the speculative ethics or sort of like, it can be post-human, it can be bringing out the voices, it can be, but it's exactly art and design can do this, sort of explore this, not necessarily better, but kind of an alternative ways of seeing the ethics. And I think that's what Jennifer was talking about, mentioning all of those points.
It's also to note, though, that not all artists are applying ethics. And I think that's, you know, we can't just assume that artists are ethical. Not all artists are. And I think that we have to also keep ourselves accountable in that space. We're with the research university, and our funding comes from research. We have to abide by that, but there's nothing that says that we can go outside of that. And what do we do once we go outside of that? That space. So I think there's also so like accountability within each other as we start to see more and more of these projects evolve, to really give each other feedback and that critical response within these communities. I know that there's a really incredible network on Facebook, the Viral Art Network, with that many bio artists are part of, that you can actually have some of that dialogue for. But I think that needs to be always front and center when making some of these decisions and some of these projects.
A question has come up in the Q&A that made me think about the kinds of alternative methodologies that might merge with scientific practice in the work that you're doing. So Roberta Buyani asked about how during COVID, her relationship with nature changed, and she found herself to be listening more carefully to the non-human. And asked if anyone had the same experience, and could this be open to new forms of collaboration as listening? Emilia, you also mentioned listening a bit earlier. So what does it mean to listen to the natural world, and what does it mean, or maybe perhaps has your artistic practice allowed you to cultivate other forms of listening or relation with the worlds that you're working with and with the living systems that you're working with, that perhaps not just in a speculative sense might be brought to bear on some of the larger conversations we're having?
Was that a question for me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if COVID changed my my nature relation. I don't know if I can refer to that. Maybe I'm less in contact with nature, being all the time at home. But yeah, listening. I think it's a very important method, and also not that easy to do. And also I think it has to do with this collaboration issue, like how to collaborate in a good way. And yeah, that's also something that I'm learning right now with my current project, how to listen and how to sort of combine these voices in a collaborative manner. I can only say that is my current learning process. I cannot give you a ready tool for listening, but I think just to acknowledge that is a good start.
Yeah, I mean, I think this sort of also this idea of being at home, I think listening to nature has also been important, but it's also, you know, to bring humor into it. It's been this year of, I can't hear you and you're muted. I can't hear you, you're muted, right? And I feel like there's this way that we actually have to spend more time trying to communicate through technology now that has created this space for listening. And I think it's true with ourselves. and, you know, with trying to be, you know, for me, a better parent at times, trying to listen to the needs of my family, trying to listen to the needs of my community, to my students, you know, that's kind of what we have at the moment. We can kind of see, but we mostly, in terms of our abilities to react to things, is right now, I think, more through listening and watching, perhaps, than and you know, taking again this moment to be better listeners, and thinking more deeply about what you're hearing. And maybe we have less time in some ways. I don't know how that happened, but we all got really busy. But if we could take the time, I think time has to be part of this listening, that we don't often allow ourselves as a species to just sort of soak up.
I'll briefly comment on that. I mean, I noticed that there are some groups that are doing really well on the listening aspect, especially during COVID. I think the Ocean Memory Project, where they've been collecting samples from everyone is from anything that was related to the ocean or the sea, and they're putting that together and actually creating listening sessions where they're listening to each other's sounds. And I thought that's really an important thing, is like sharing what you're listening to as well. That was pretty important. I think with what I'm trying to develop right now, with looking at these different community conversations, I'm thinking quite a bit about how do we listen to these non-human spaces, because there's data coming in, right, from deep sea oceanographers, people who are collecting information on sound waves, radio frequencies, vibrations, and then how do we then rethink about how do we listen on that level, and looking at high dimensional space and the different deep learning ways and machine learning ways that we can actually understand that high dimensional space, and bringing in those particular sounds and that sonification part. And then there's been a lot of people who are focusing on the meditation, which I think is an important counteraction to where we have been living in this virtual space, is bringing in nature as part of that meditation, whether that still involves the technology or completely disconnects us from it.
Yeah, it makes me think of Jenny Odell's book, How to Do Nothing, which is about kind of resistance to the attention economy. And cultivating forms of attention. Her particular practice is bird watching, and kind of using taxonomy and the taxonomies of bird watching as a way to enter into new forms of attention and relation with the natural environment. So that might be too one model of kind of merging scientific models of classification with meditation as well, and thinking about what we need to kind of cultivate these other kinds of relationships with the worlds we're in. And I think in all of your art practices, there's a lot of possibilities for sustaining and cultivating new forms of attention to the worlds that we inhabit. Okay, as we are kind of rounding out into the last 10 minutes of this hour, I wanted to give some time to our audience members who wanted to share questions and to participate more thoroughly in this conversation. So if you haven't already, I invite you to submit questions either in the chat or the Q&A. There's a question here that I'll open with and invite you all to answer. And this picks up on something we were talking a bit about earlier. Leon Liu asks, are the transhuman, post-human, and decolonial perspectives against humanism? And I guess the undercurrent to that is that a problem? Is there a kind of issue with humanism, and is there an issue with decentering the human if we value humanism?
I mean, I think there's room for everybody. You know, I think we can, you know, value ourselves and others. I don't know. I'm not sure what the what the point of the question is if it again, it's sort of a, you know, for me, it becomes too binary, right? In that.
Yeah, I think for me it's comes really down to this question of the nature relation. I mean, obviously, I think I also agree that all of those different perspectives are welcomed and very interesting to discuss. But the problematic thing that I find with transhumanism, if you think about it as a sort of like extreme naturalistic view on nature, that it includes this sort of like a human mastery over nature, that it's always about like human controlling nature only for human ends. But of course, it doesn't mean about forgetting the human. You know, there's also we also have to appreciate the good side of the sides of the humanism. So I guess it's a kind of a navigation between these different perspectives. But for my critique is particularly of this dualistic human mastery over nature that I sort of criticize in transhumanism, or extreme naturalistic idea of humanism.
I don't think we're anytime soon going to really disconnect ourselves from that mindset, not, at least not in the near future. But I think what's happening is that we need to realize that the centuries of us really writing about how we're the top of the animal kingdom, or that we're we're dominating, sorry, the food chain or whatever, all of those aspects and structures we've done systematically have also endangered all these species. And I can see there's a call coming in, so I'm gonna mute myself and let the experts.
It's timely because technology, like nature, never quite behaves right when you want it to. Yeah, I think that this narrative is an important one, right? Like, how do we sustain what's good about humanity, but also kind of acknowledge that there's been extraordinary destruction when we only center the human. Tom Zimmerman asked a question about how artists advance the science, not just ethically, but in the sense of actually the technical scientific part. For example, he says you can imagine the visual abilities of artists contributing to the visualization of data to see and uncover biomechanisms. So might any of you want to comment on how in your own practice, or perhaps in your larger understanding of art and biology, how artists might have actually advanced that scientific practice?
Well, the Open Lab has a data visualization collective actually that just started this quarter, and it was this idea of having an intersectional group of people come together and do data visualizations. And I think a lot of new perspectives happened for the scientists as they were visualizing their data in completely different ways, and through those conversations with the artists and the woman who was running the collective. And I think it's also a societal, and this is a year of everyone looking at the COVID data, right? Like, we suddenly are starting to want to be more informed, or how do we organize information, and how do we know if that information is put together ethically, and who decides? And when you start to sort of unravel it and understand more about data and how it is collected or used, it becomes another way in which we need to be smarter and more understood. And I think, again, having an artist in that conversation, but going back to Danielle, it could be not somebody who's going to be ethically looking out for everyone, can at least poke questions at that, but depending, of course, on who and how. But yes, I think there's been lots of inventions that have happened when you have an interdisciplinary team sitting at the table with cross cultures.
Yeah, I do think there are some really interesting breakthroughs, and I'm trying to remember his name. I feel like somewhere in the Midwest. I want to say last name is Brown. So if any of you remembers his first name in the audience. And I remember he worked in a bio lab, and he did a few different things that were really interesting. One is that he worked on a process to extract gold from something, and from a particular type of mineral, working in that biolab. And then also he learned how to create a specific type of green pigment that was originally coming from arsenic, to actually isolate arsenic to get that arsenic green, because for like a century the arsenic green was applied to many ceramics and other materials, but because of the way that it was manufactured, it became very dangerous. But then through this scientific process, was able to figure out how to do it really safely. So I do think, I want to say Paul Brown. I don't think it's Zachary Brown. I don't think it's like Adam or Paul, something like that. I'll have to take a look at some of my notes. But thanks, Tom, for suggesting that. But these are really good examples of where artists are really creating those fake breakthroughs. The other one, I will say, I'll make a note that MySoWorks, which is now a really flourishing leather company, mycelial leather company, started by an artist who was working with mushrooms and created this leather substance, and now is in collaboration with Hermes to create leather handbags. Similarly, Kui, which is created by Jay Lim Ree. What is her last name? Jay, okay, I'm really bad with names, but Jay Rim Lee, who was an artist out of the MIT Media Lab. She created this burial mushroom. Phil Ross did MySoWorks, and then she did Kui, COEI. I don't know. I'll look it up and I'll put in the chat in a second. But in these infinity burial mushroom suits, which actually decompose humans, and now people are actually using them to be buried in cemeteries that use the land as parks, and not using things like burning, or like infernos or formaldehyde, but it's actually using those natural components to make things happen. So these are great examples where artists are creating breakthroughs within the technology that didn't exist before.
Thanks, Danielle. So in the last few minutes we have left, it seems almost appropriate to return to this theme that's emerged as recurrent over the last hour, and a question about maybe your hopes for the field. So Francois Joseph Lapointe asks, do you think it is really possible to collaborate with nature, or will there always be sort of a top-down relationship? And so I might reorient that and say, like, well, how do you hope to reorient this relationship? Do you think it's possible? And how might you understand that trajectory?
Well, yeah, I don't know if it is possible, but I think it is already the first step if we start thinking differently. So that might then lead into the right direction. So I'm already kind of happy with that if my work or somebody else's work manages that to sort of change the perspective. But I couldn't say if it is going to be 100% sure possible to truly collaborate with nature. There is, of course, because we are humans, we look at it from the human perspective. But yeah, I guess I'm trying to do the first step, sort of shifting the perspective in the design.
Yeah, I think that I agree. That's we have to get to this place of mutual understanding, and maybe it goes back to mutual aid as well. I think we do collaborate with nature. Just again, taking in oxygen and exhaling carbon, right? There's all of these ways that we maybe need to sort of acknowledge how we are collaborating, if collaborating is the word. I think what do I think? I don't know. I think there's a lot of potential, and this idea of possibility is a really wonderful place to sort of reside. And I think this is why speculative everything is on the table again. And you know, I can't even count the number of times I've heard Donna Haraway's name this year. It's just been incredible. So I think, you know, we're at this new place where language, the human language is a barrier, and I think using our other senses to feel the kinds of connections we have. I don't think other creatures think about collaborations as much as we are in this moment. You know, you have ants and bees and insects and dogs and cats and all kinds of species who are kind of wandering around getting what they need and not necessarily worrying about tromping on each other's territory and even fighting it out. So I'm not sure, you know, but I do think, as Emilia is saying, as sort of the dominant species, we have to take this moment to reposition ourselves.
Great. Well, that takes us to the end of the hour. Thank you all so much. At this time, I'd like to highlight that Immersive Arts Alliance is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to place extraordinary performances and exhibitions throughout the Bay Area accessible to all. We rely on contributions from individuals, corporations, and foundations to support the development and presentations of our programs. If you are so moved, we are grateful for your donations. And if you would like to learn more, you can find out at immersiveartsalliance.org. At the same time, I also say that Leonardo, co-presenter of this event, is also a nonprofit, and you can find out more about them at leonardo.info. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists for your robust conversation, thoughtful contributions, and provocative work. It's been delightful to share this hour with you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's really great
you.
to have this discussion and more, and to continue more. So thank you.
Looking forward to it.